classic balance that supply chain leaders need to achieve is among cost, cash, and inventory. In many cases in life sciences, because of historically high margins, we're able to use inventory essentially as a hedge, carry a lot of inventory, and then not need to pay so much attention to cash and cost as it relates to that balance. Would you agree with that? And what's your experience with that in industry?
Yeah, look, I think you're absolutely right. If we look historically, then as supply chain leaders designed and operated supply chains, they were trying to balance between service, cost, and cash, to your point. And with service being generally the preeminent area of focus because you don't want to put patients at risk. And we did that by carrying a lot of inventory, right? And companies were carrying 9, 10, 12, 15, 18 months sometimes. And I come back, my past career was in FMCG, where I was used to measuring inventory in days. And in life sciences, we measure inventory in months. But I think to your point, the pressures on the industry and companies ahead mean that they can't operate in that same way. We're just carrying a lot of inventory for various reasons. One, because of course, as companies want to invest even more into R&D, even more into acquisitions, even more into other investments, they need to free up cash. And if you've got billions tied up in inventory, then that's billions tied up in money that you can't spend elsewhere. That's one. The second one I would say is just from experience, anyone who's spent any amount of time in supply chain knows that 85% of the time, the inventory you're holding, unfortunately, is not the inventory that you need, right? And one of the things I have found in life sciences, as opposed to FMCG, is even though we hold a stack of inventory, our service levels aren't always that much higher. And therefore, I think that holding a lot of inventory sometimes just gives you a false sense of security and allows you to perhaps be less agile and flexible in your supply chains as other industries have had to be. And therefore, I think apart from the reason for freeing up cash, I think that we're all focused on reducing inventories through other programs like agility and so on, in a means to become more efficient and effective in serving our end patients and end customers.
Interesting. Something else I find fascinating about inventory is in the classical lean tradition, inventory is viewed as a bad thing. Inventory is a waste. But in fact, inventory is a tool, isn't it? And choosing to hold the right amount of inventory at the right position in the supply chain is important. So your point about the idea that you could be swimming in inventory and yet still have low customer service. And then add to that the idea that our products don't last forever. There's a certain time on shelf. And so if you simply look at the amount of yield loss and scrap that occurs in industry, a lot of that scrap is occurring from inventory that's held too long, isn't it?
You're absolutely right. And that then plays to the write-offs. You're throwing away even more cash. It's costing you money to do all of that. And in the end, exactly to your point, you're still not necessarily doing a better job of serving your customers or end patients.
Exactly. And looking into the future, we've talked about this on many occasions. There are two additional outcomes that we need to solve for, aren't there? So in a way, we talked about the triangle, cash, cost, and inventory, but really this is more of a pentagon, isn't it? Tell me more about those additional outcomes.
Yeah, I think, as you mentioned, historically, we would have been trying to optimize in our design and operation of supply chains for that triangle. And that is evolving or has evolved to more of a pentagon where you add in the need for resilience and the need for sustainability. So as supply chain leaders now think about designing their supply networks, as well as trying to balance between service cost and cash, they're having to make sure that they can be resilient to some of the supply shocks that might be coming along and design for that, and also design and operate the supply chains to be more sustainable, both from an environmental standpoint and indeed from a social standpoint as well. So if you're moving from that hard job of optimizing for the triangle, it becomes exponentially harder to now try and optimize for that pentagon.
Exactly.